Hello, and thank you for joining us, everyone, at Creation Summit 2020. I'm very privileged to be here with two friends and colleagues today to talk to you guys about the subjects we've been presenting here in the Creation Summit. These gentlemen are passionate about the subject of creation and, to a lesser extent, I guess you could say, evolution as well. We are going to just discuss some questions, discuss the topics that we've presented already thus far in the Creation Summit, and we're excited to do this together, and we're happy that you're joining us for this conversation. So, John, thanks for coming. Sven, thanks for coming.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great. And you gentlemen are both learned, intelligent men, in my estimation. And so could you just tell the audience, although you may have already in your presentation, what you guys do? You're both doctors, but not the same kinds of doctors. John, what do you do?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I work for Sanitarium in the area of strategic research for them, and also am an adjunct professor at RMIT University in the area of applied sciences. So my background essentially is industrial chemistry, but also philosophy. I studied epistemology at uni.
Okay, fantastic. Awesome. And Sven?
Yeah, so my background is electrical engineering. So started off at uni with that and then progressed to computer networking, and did my PhD in that area. And yeah, when I was doing postdoctoral research, I should say, in the area of optical networks and mobile ad hoc networks, just got into the whole topic of evolution and creation. I had a housemate who was into that topic. So right now, I've made the big switch to ministry and working here in the North New South Wales Conference in the area of church planting. But I see it as a really important area, which a lot of young adults, but even older people, even primary school kids, are needing to face this topic.
Yes.
And I feel it's really, really important that we actually address it in our church and in society as well.
Absolutely. So I've read your book, John, because you've written a book called Evolution Impossible, and your presentations in Creation Summit this year were on Evolution Impossible. I listened to your presentation, Sven, as well. Fantastic, awesome, amazing. I was super blessed by both, and I'm blessed by your book too. What got you guys interested in the subject in the first place? Evolution versus creation.
Well, I became a Christian in the early 70s. I was baptised in 1971, and at the time I was working as a research fellow in the chemistry department at the University of Tasmania. Okay. And as I started going to church, the church folk would ask me, you're there studying for a doctorate, what do you think about evolution and creation? And of course I hadn't thought about that. When I studied at university, I did my first degree here at the University of Newcastle, and I topped chemistry, but one of my subjects was geology.
Yes.
But we weren't taught in terms of evolution, we were taught simply the long ages, and we had to learn the fossils corresponding to the different ages, and it just didn't click. So I began doing research in that area, particularly in the area of radiometric dating, because that seemed to be the foundation of the long time frames that were underpinning the evolutionary model. And this is what an area that I found was full of flaws. And so that started my interest, and I began reading since.
Okay, fantastic. And so at that point in time, were you already, were you, when you became a Christian, a believer in the biblical narrative of creation, or had you not even gotten to that point?
I just hadn't thought about it. I'd obviously read it because at that stage I'd read the Bible through, but there's a lot of material there, and I guess a lot of things just, don't sink in of what the consequences. And I just read it. This was an account. The world was created. It seemed very reasonable for me because we're here. How'd we get here?
That's right.
And unfortunately, none of my schooling or university studies looked at origins in that. So it never came up. And, I did applied maths and physics as majors, and it didn't come up in those areas.
I find that it's interesting, right? Because you're a believer, as many people, when you were first coming to faith, you hadn't processed sufficiently to know, what do I think about this?
No, exactly.
And then now you're studying in university, and there's a different viewpoint being shared, and then that tension compels you to have to study for yourself. It's kind of interesting.
I think the other thing as well, which comes out from your experience too, John, is, there's this saying that, biology just doesn't make sense except in the light of evolution.
Yeah.
And I'd just say that's simply not true. You can study a whole lot of biology and chemistry and physics as well, and you don't need any of the evolutionary paradigm at all. And so I think it's a misunderstanding that evolution really underpins all of science when it really doesn't.
Yeah. Well, so what sparked your interest in this?
I guess for me,
your roommate?
Well, it goes back a little bit further than that.
Yeah.
I always enjoy digging deep into, what we believe and why we believe it.
Yeah, right.
I don't like sort of saying, well, the Bible says so, therefore that's it.
Yeah.
So when I was young, I started to read these materials about creation, Werner Gitt and others as well. And also my dad would take me to a Creation Ministries International
that's cool.
topic.
Yeah.
And then he'd take me to hear a Uniting Church heretic at the time and sort of give me both
How do
sides.
you really feel about that?
And my mum was really, don't do that. Don't take Sven to hear the heretic. But I got to see both sides, and I could just see the holes. For example, the heretic was saying, well, Jesus never rose from the dead. He was never born as a virgin conception, things like that.
Sure.
So I guess I was really, really interested from a personal point of view.
It's almost like your dad groomed you. He just threw you in there. Hey, here's different views. Sven, what do you think?
It's really interesting. I heard a talk by John Lennox recently from Oxford University, and he said, his dad gave him different books. He gave him a book on Marxism. And John Lennox, coming from a Christian family, said, why are you giving this to me? And he said, son, you need to know it. You need to dive into it so you really understand it and you can respond to it. So moving the clock forward, it was really a time when I was doing my postdoc, and I had the landlady in the house. We had a number of different students and researchers, and she said to me, I'm an evolutionist and an atheist. That was on the very first day I moved into the house. And then we went on a journey, and it really, her questioning of my beliefs really drove me to explore what did I really believe. And that's what I would really like to say to young adults and young people as well. Really go out there. Don't be afraid of atheists or people who believe in evolution or Muslims or people like that. Really go and discuss with them, because what will happen is your faith will be strengthened as you do and try and share your faith as well.
Yeah, right on. Amen. That's so good. Hey, I applaud your dad for that. That's very. I'm a dad, and you so desperately want your kids to believe what you believe to be the truth. And so, yeah, good on him. That actually probably showed confidence. Your dad was confident in what he believed, for sure. Okay, so guys, why do you think that most scientists have the evolution worldview? Like, why do you think that most, I guess it's fair to say most, in the scientific community believe that evolution is fact? And most of those people who believe in evolution don't believe in it as a theory. Most of them believe in it as, this is beyond theory, this is established scientific fact.
Absolutely.
I mean, I hear people speaking that way. Maybe I'm not right about that, but comment. Why do you think most people in sciences believe in evolution?
Well, I think my perspective is that it probably comes back, that's what they've been taught.
Okay.
And it's certainly being taught as a fact in science, particularly if you do the life sciences, medicine, biomedical science, these sort of things. But when you actually talk to practicing scientists, and I do this all the time, for most of them, it's something they've never sort of really thought about deeply. Okay, I learned it, I passed my exams, that's it. And most scientists that I know don't actually work in that area. Yep. But there are a few scientists who do work, for example, in evolutionary biology areas, who are, quite politically, sort of activists in this area, and for some reason want to ensure that everybody learns this background.
Yep.
But I had the situation, for example, we were applying for a university research grant with some researchers at the University of Queensland, and one of the titles in that department was evolution, you know, it was evolutionary something or other. And the guy said to me, the professor in charge said, "Look, John, I hope you don't mind, but we believe in evolution. Is that okay?" And I thought that was so respectful, because they knew I was a creationist and they wanted to know, was I still comfortable to work with them? Yeah. That was really good. On the other hand, I published an article in Chemistry Australia in 2007 called A Creationist View of the Intelligent Design Debate. And when that, and I put there my arguments and the reasons why I believe in creation. And there was immediate response from some evolutionists saying that this article should never have been published, you know. You know, Professor Ashton has used made-up arguments and all this sort of thing. Essentially called me a liar, you know. And the Royal Australian Chemical Institute had to decide to pull that article off the internet, even though it was a peer-reviewed, featured article in their journal. But when I spoke to the editor, a number of scientists had contacted them saying they were so pleased to see that article in the journal. And my detractors, none of my detractors actually provided any evidence that I was wrong. They just made assertions about that I was wrong. So I actually decided to phone them up and say, well, you know, they've called me a liar, you know, sort of thing, where's the evidence, you know. And two of them I didn't get through to, but one guy I did get through to was at the University of New England. And I said, look, I understand you weren't very happy with my piece. You know, what's the evidence that I'm wrong? And his reply was, well, we don't have the evidence yet, but we will. And
Great.
I thought, yeah, okay, Jesus hasn't come yet, but he will, you know.
That's so true. You know, have you guys ever,
they don't have a leg to stand on, but they're making all these strong assertions. And because they hold the position of professor or so forth, and the young students, they take it all in. And this is the culture of science that is in our universities at the present time.
Have you guys ever heard of David Berlinski? He wrote the book, The Devil's Delusion is a response to Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion.
Very sharp.
Okay, so I had never read the book until recently, and I felt, before ever reading the book, what he thinks in the book, and that is that, like what you're reflecting in what you're saying, John, that there is at the moment almost like a medieval style hierarchy in the sciences, where you have kind of like the high priests, you know, who, if you deviate from their orthodoxy, you're finished. Like, it's just, they're coming to put you to the flames. You're going to go see the inquisitors, you know. And I'm being, you know, that's not what you just said, but what you said reminded me of that, you know, because you have these individuals who are, not only did they, you know, just say you were wrong, just assert you were wrong without proving you were wrong, but then they impugned your motivation as well, and by calling you a liar and dishonest and whatnot. And they can get away with that because of their bully pulpits, right? Like, they have these positions of power and esteem and influence, and they sometimes wield that very unfairly, which is just disappointing, really, especially when you sit in a position of professor or scientist, you know, because you're in a very trusted position. And I feel like the way that the sciences are sometimes being used is very similar to religion in the ancient times. And that's kind of what Berlinski, you know, kind of contends quite a bit. He argues that a lot. Pretty good, I think. And
just building on what John was saying there, I think there's a real, in academia, there's a need or a sense that you have to respect other people in other areas. That often, for people who've done PhDs, you know that the research area is very, very narrow. And obviously you expand that once you move beyond that PhD area, your thesis. But in terms of your focus, it's a very specific focus. So potentially you become the world expert in that area or close to it, whatever. But of course, you may not know about the other areas. So there's this sense in which you have to, or you should, respect other people who have made contributions. You shouldn't necessarily challenge it because they're experts in that area. And I think this is really important for us within a faith-based organization, within the church, because there's this idea that, you know, that I can be looking at theology, I can be studying the biblical narrative, but I need to respect the other people in science, the majority, and I need to incorporate what they have, the conclusions that they've made into my worldview. And I think that's a really, it's an unwise position to be in. I think we should be willing to critique a whole lot of different areas, be a polymath, and explore those ideas. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why scientists often will just take on board the evolutionary paradigm, just work within it.
Yeah, that's it. It's so established and entrenched in thinking.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so most scientists would also, besides being evolutionists, would also just patently reject creationism. Why do you think that's the case? It's probably the same answer, but I'm going to ask the question anyways.
So Richard Lewontin made a very interesting statement, which is very, very famous. He said, our commitment to naturalism is so total that we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Very, very famous statement.
It's a great, I was just reading that recently because I was looking over John Lennox's book.
Yes.
I can't remember what it's called, but it's an apologetic book. Has science buried God?
God's Undertaker?
Yes, God's Undertaker, yeah. And he cites that as a quote in one of his chapters.
Yes. So this is the key for me, is that it's this idea that we are committed to naturalism. And I think it's very, very important within the Christian circles that people would say, well, that's not necessarily atheism. Of course, naturalism in its pure sense is atheism, but there's this sense in which we study processes that occur and we don't appeal to God and we don't appeal to miracles and supernatural special divine actions. We just don't do it. So we don't, if I submit a PhD thesis or a paper, I don't refer to God unless I'm kind of depreciating, that kind of paradigm. I just look for those concepts where it's process, it's evolutionary, all of those kind of things. And so that is why, from a creation point of view, they will go and say we cannot accept it because it appeals to God, it appeals to miracles as well.
It's a pre-commitment.
That's right.
Yeah, it's almost, but that to me is more a philosophical position than a scientific position.
That's correct.
Right,
Scientism.
Yeah, that's right. Scientism. That's a word that probably not a lot of our listeners have ever heard before. Are you familiar with that term, John? Scientism?
Yes.
Versus science. You want to expand on that for a second? Because I read a book on once called C.S. Lewis and the New Atheists, and in that book, the author breaks down the difference between science and scientism and how people conflate the two, and in doing so, make evolution seem like a much stronger position than it is.
Yes. The basic concept in science is that science is open to ideas. So if God exists and if, he does things within the world, let's find that out. And for me, that's an exciting journey to be on.
Yeah.
So there's a willingness to explore to, what we learn is provisional, and we could always find out, if God exists beyond the universe, transcends the universe, whatever.
Yeah.
Scientism is an add-on. It's an add-on, really, which is a whole philosophy, which is science is the ultimate authority. It's the end kind of, in all of this, the answers that we need.
Yep.
And there's two different types, but one is that everything else is basically superfluous, or at least scientism gives the greatest authority.
Yep.
And that's simply not the case, because we need to say science needs to be open. That's the whole point of being a scientist. And I think that's really...
So scientism disallows scientists from actually following where evidence leads, because they've already decided that they would not accept any evidence that would lead otherwise than their conclusions already.
But I think that's unscientific.
Right.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Yes, and also the philosophical foundations too are based on how can we know and all sorts of things, and you run into the whole questions of morality in science, and people don't realise, of course, that the science progressed so beautifully in the Christian West because it was underpinned by the Christian values of honesty, and that God created, and God as an intelligent being created things that would be logical. They would follow the laws of mathematics, and we could discover these. And
And building on that as well, not only it's the laws of mathematics and logic, God actually created our minds to be able to understand the universe. This is really, really important. This is at the very foundation. When you undermine the fact that God created our minds, you are actually destroying the foundations for science as well.
Very good. Yeah, awesome. So good thoughts. Okay, on to the next question. I want to kind of keep going on that rabbit hole, but I just think it's such an interesting series of thoughts that you've shared. Have either of you guys ever been under pressure to adopt the evolution scenario in your research and in your papers and just in your work?
No.
Never?
No.
Good for you.
But
Good for the people you work with.
I have met, for example, biochemists at some of Australia's top universities, and one in particular I remember chatting to this young guy, and he was talking to me after his lecture at a conference, and he was saying, actually, I'm a Christian, and he said, I don't believe in this evolution stuff, but he said, I've got to present it or I don't have a career.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so this was a real battle for him because he didn't believe it. He saw a whole lot of problems. And what happens is that when you're a junior academic, you've got to get those papers out. You can't get the professor on the wrong side of you. You're not going to get funding, this sort of thing. But it's interesting, some of the very senior people working in these areas recognise, for example, that evolution is impossible. Well, there are major problems with the Darwinian theory, like how did the code arise? How did the code reader, the ribosome, arise? These sort of questions. And if you go into physics, really, where did, the inflation energy come from to expand the Big Bang? Where did it all come from? Why should there be anything? These questions aren't answered in physics. They're not answerable, but they are answered in the Bible.
Really good. It wouldn't be this as relevant a question for you, I wouldn't suppose, because in engineering, no one probably cares what you believe, but
no, certainly
there's a social pressure.
Yeah, certainly in engineering, it's much more, how do you make systems work? How do you design systems? All of that, that kind of focus. But I guess I would say I haven't experienced an incredible, immense amount of pressure, but I would say I've experienced a subtle pressure from Christian scientists who believe either in progressive creationism or theistic evolution. And there it's more of it's a sort of condescending approach where you're not really up to snuff if you don't believe it. You should know better than to believe in creation. So it's, and sometimes you just got to, accept that maybe that's their issue that they're facing. But there can be that little kind of sort of nudges and along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because you've just reminded me. I think that's where I've had my strongest criticisms from, apart from that particular article in Chemistry Australia, is from scientists within the church who don't adopt the young Earth literal in 6-day position. But, for example, I was meeting with one of Australia's top cancer researchers. Matter of fact, she was featured on television with regard to the COVID virus and so forth. And I met her at a meeting. I've published some work with her, and I met her at recently or the other year down in Melbourne, and mentioned I was giving some talks in the area of creation. And her reply was, "Oh, my husband would love to come. When was that coming?"
Interesting.
This sort of thing. And another guy that I work with that heads a large research centre at the University of Sydney and had his office just down the hall at Oxford from Richard Dawkins, and I mentioned, that I do work in the area of creation, and was a world-leading entomologist, and he sort of just laughed, but he accepted that. okay, that's your view,
How sweet. How cute.
And I think that's how it should be. Whereas, often some of the people, that can be, fairly nasty. Maybe it's because they feel they're insecure in their position. They don't want someone else to threaten their position.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's a different question, but it's one I have to ask. Why do you think that is the case? So why would there be more negativity coming from Christian scientists who believe in the Darwinian view of evolution than from outsiders? I hate to use that word, but just people in the world who are scientists. I know you can't read everyone's motives, but I'm going to ask the question anyway.
That's the question.
I'm not asking you for to divine everyone's motives, but why do you feel that would be the case? What possibilities exist for that?
I think it originally comes from a pressure that they have experienced within academia.
Yeah.
This is my reading, and I think that conversations in university hallways, you'll never make it unless you accept, evolution. You need to, if you want to move ahead. And I think that pressure can be very, very real. I mean, I haven't faced it myself, that direct pressure, but and then I think it's then a process of a journey where they would head down this track of evolution. They would see that they believe the evidence, shall I say, what they see as the evidence, and then I think it becomes almost like a bit of a crusade, where we need to move the church forward to truth. We need to move it into the 21st century, and to really not be back in the Dark Ages or the Bronze Era, that kind of thing. I think there's those kind of elements, and I think there's another aspect too, which is that within academia there's an immense pressure to produce novel research. So you need to produce something novel. So when you're working with an Adventist environment, to be preaching about creation and the Ten Commandments and the Gospels and things like that, I mean, this can sound really, we've heard it all before.
Right.
Why are you talking about this? So the pressure is, where can I find a new opportunity? And this desire to have novel ideas, I believe, can actually draw us into ideas which are not actually grounded in the Bible.
Wow, that's really good. It reminds me of how Solomon said there's no new thing under the sun, though. You know, and isn't this is the problem I find with preachers as well. I came from a world of itinerant preachers in the United States before I came here. And one of the challenges that I faced is that every time you go speak at a big conference, you're tempted to pull out the trickiest sermon, because then you justify your existence. You distinguish yourself. You show everyone how clever you are and how deep you are and how profound you can be with the Bible. And then sometimes, you think, I could preach this sermon, but is this sermon what everyone needs to hear? And then also you begin to realize that maybe in this sermon I was incorrect in certain areas and was getting a little bit wild and overly creative, but I preached it and everyone was wowed by it. But now I'm realizing that it's not really a balanced presentation. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's just a human problem.
It is a human problem.
But it's in that particular space of society,
But I think the important thing is when we have arrived at truth, I think we should be willing to settle into the truth, if I could put it that way.
Sure.
Rather than feeling the constant need to be novel, to be creative. Of course, there's a whole universe for us to explore, but not to let go of the fundamentals, shall I say? I mean, that we need to hang on to.
That's like Psalm 11. I think it's Psalm 11:3 or 6. It says, "If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do?" So foundational truth should not be tinkered with. And when you do find something that's fundamentally true, close your mind to what's not true. There's a guy named Leslie Harding. He's one of my favorite theologians before he passed about a decade and a half ago. He used to say that the most beautiful thing in the world to have is a closed mind And he'd say it with knowing people's immediate reaction is going to be like, well, that's not what I've ever been told, you know. You don't want to be closed-minded. And then he would explain by saying, some people's minds are so open that their brains are about to fall out. And then he'd say, you know, my mind was open to a wife before I was married to one. And I looked and searched and I found the perfect woman. She was perfect for me. And then we got married. And then as soon as we got married, I closed my mind to every other woman in the world. And he said, so I'm not telling you to have closed minds and not seek for truth. I'm telling you that when you find something that's that's true, close your mind to everything that's not.
Absolutely.
Isn't that that's a really good point.
Is.
And I think I think sometimes in our search for originality, we just become trendy, or maybe I'm not accusing anyone, but we can become just chasers of originality.
The fashionable ideas.
Yeah, like if I'm somebody who really wants to be original, why not just be true and honest and just tell the truth, live the truth, seek for the truth, but not allow my desire for distinction or originality, whatever that's supposed to mean, to drive me to just kind of all kinds of searches and conclusions. This is something that I think is important to me, because I've got friends who are really desirous in ministry of being original, and then I always think, there's no new thing under the sun. There's just no new thing under the sun, and so the only way I can be original is by being, number one, who God made me to be, and to tell the truth. That's the way to be original. And if the truth has been told by a million other people, and you're just going to join in that song, okay, fine, just do it. But yeah, cool. Okay, so on to the next question here, guys. This is a really good one, I think. What is your advice for university students studying in life sciences with regards to evolution-based coursework? So the studying...
Well, yeah, I think it's very, very important that you learn, what you're taught, so that you can get the highest marks that you can in the exam. I think it would be futile to stand up and say, look, I'm a creationist, I don't believe in this, I don't think it's true, and this sort of thing. I think you're throwing your pearls before swine. I think our universities at the present time are so inculcated with the evolutionary view as a fact that essentially you would simply be judged as not being suitable to be a scientist. It'd be the end. So it's an unfortunate situation, but that's why I think it's important to study that, but also be aware that there are other resources. There are some top scientists in the world that are creationists. And we're finding all the time more and more evidence for creation, and there are also top scientists in the world that see major problems with evolution. But it's just that this information isn't getting out in the normal university textbooks. It's not being taught to students, but it is there. But at the present time, no, the best thing I think you can do is get your degrees, get the best marks for your degrees, and then when you're out there, pray about it, and God will call you to what He has in plan for your life.
That's really good. Yeah.
I'd really recommend spending time in your university textbooks, the research papers, but I think there's a real need to spend time in God's Word, to pray about it, and to really build that connection with God. And I really believe that God does want to reveal Himself to us. And as we read through the Bible, we go Genesis, Exodus, all the way through to Revelation. So important to be grounded, because ultimately our eternal life is based on our relationship with God. But I would also recommend, and this is a very sincere recommendation, that you also spend time in another revealed source that God has given to us as well. And that's a prophetic gift that we have as an Adventist church within our denomination. And that includes, the Conflict of the Ages series, the book Education, because what we find is that, when people looked at Jesus, they said, "Isn't this amazing? He's so well spoken." And yet he's never studied. He actually just studied at home with his mum. and it was really incredible. And the other thing is, you go to the book of Acts, and the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, are looking at Peter and John, and they marvel, they're astonished, because these people are uneducated people. And then they took note that they'd spent time with Jesus. And I believe that ultimately you'll never be able to be grounded in the truth, what God wants to reveal to you, unless you're spending time in God's Word, in prayer, and what God has revealed to us in His prophetic gift as well.
Amen.
Yes.
That's so true.
So important.
So true. The apostles and their testimony to the Pharisaical leaders is a brilliant example of the power of God in an academic towards academics.
Absolutely.
Because arguably those were the most educated men on the planet at the time. You could make that case, I'd say. They were really intelligent, highly developed persons, and they would hear the apostles speaking and think, wow. They're unlearned. How does this? And I just say this in regards to university, because I have friends who have told me as they've studied, they committed to God that they were not going to leave scriptural study behind. They were not going to infringe upon their conscientious commitment to the Sabbath and different kinds of things that made it a little more challenging for them in their studies than for their counterparts. And they said that God never failed them. Their professors, 9 out of 10 times, would show favor towards them, even after discovering that they were Bible-believing Christians. And they would most of the time do what you were saying too, John. They would just, they wouldn't take a stand on every issue in class and challenge their professors. They'd be respectful, listen, learn, study their course material as a humble, learner. But then at the same time, not deviate in their commitment to Jesus, be studying the Word of God, passionately with all of their hearts. And then the power of Jesus would shine in their lives, and the professors would think, well, these people are great, intelligent, thoughtful, original in their approaches, and then that would actually give the professors a positive outlook on creationism, because they'd have these really good examples of students who love God. And
if I could give a specific area of the Bible to focus on, I would recommend Daniel chapter 1.
Yes.
You have these 4 university students, long way from home, could have easily just blended in with the woodwork. So
they're in Babylon University.
Exactly. But they resolved to follow God's principles. And you go through this journey. You see them not willing to bow down to the image. You see Daniel committed to prayer. And this is the key. This is the paradigm biblical example of a university student away from home, and really powerful. I do want to say, and I know this might sound a little challenging, but I actually believe that evolution has a lot of similarities with Daniel chapter 3 and the worship of the image. In terms of, I believe that evolution has many similar qualities with Baal worship in the Bible. And that's very provocative, I know, but if you want to make your stand and not worship, shall I say, the idols of our age. And Tim Keller, evangelical pastor, talks about the idols, but I believe this is one of the idols of our age. We need to follow the example of people like Daniel, Joseph, Peter, John, and of course Jesus himself. Absolutely.
I think, it's interesting because, anyways, I'm going to leave it at that because your answers were awesome.
But one of the things, John Lennox, in his one of his recent books, Against the Flow.
Exactly.
He talks. He uses this example of Daniel in Babylon and saying this is so relevant to the current age. And so, as you say, John Lennox is triple doctorate professor of mathematics at Oxford.
Yep. Yes.
And he recognises this, and he believes the prophecies. He sees those prophecies.
Yes. What I would add to that, John, as well, he's an evangelical apologist. I would read that book, but I'd also take some of our Adventist commentaries on Daniel as well, because there's profound insights in Daniel too. But brilliant example of how an academic person can look to Daniel.
So you guys have baited me, and I will say what I was going to say. But essentially an idol is, it's a false concept of God, in essence. So a person has an idea of what God is, what God's like, and they project that idea onto wood, stone, whatever. That's what an ancient person would do. So all these ancient tribal religions, they had these views of God, and they projected those views of God onto these objects of worship, and then they'd worship them. And then what they were doing effectively is they were worshiping their own ideas.
Exactly.
They were literally, I came up with this idea, I put this idea into a form, and then now I'm going to worship this idea. So it's the worshiping of my own ideas. Now, when you have limited people, like even the most staunch atheists, the most devout scientistic thinker is going to confess that people are limited. Like our capacity to know and understand, it's limited.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as soon as you remove like the divine, the transcendent, the almighty from the picture, all you're left with in the universe is what's evolved, and what's evolved is limited beings that have a limited capacity to understand and reason. Now you've got all these beings parading around, triumphantly saying there is no God, science shows us all the truth, and if you don't believe it, we're going to kick you out of the university as a simpleton, right? Okay, but wait a second. Aren't you just taking your thinking, your knowledge, your capacity to understand, developing a view about that, and then worshiping it? So I think that you saying that it's an idol of the modern age is like, you could write a book about that because it's totally true.
Well, see, the thing is this, Matt, is that we all need a meta-narrative which explains where we came from, our origin,
Yes.
why we're here, and where we're going. Just bring out three. And the thing is this, it's incredible. I was watching the BBC film series, The Planets, recently. And of course, Brian Cox, he doesn't believe in God. He's agnostic or atheist, wherever his current position is. But it's incredible. He will say the value is in the story. And it's about creating this story about how the worlds collided and created the moons and the rings. And of course, part of that story is true. God does work with natural laws. But the thing is, when you make those laws the very paradigm, or the very means, I should say, by which we were created, that is a religion. That is ultimately an idol, because it's projecting our ideas, exactly what you said, and creating a type of God.
That's so, and I've found in the books that I've read that when people persist in this idea that there is no God and the universe, they end up finding themselves in the position of having to say that the universe is eternal, because they can't explain a universe that has a starting point without something that started the universe. But that's its own discussion. So they get into these ideas of multiverses and the universe is eternal and whatnot, which kind of sounds like they've made the universe into God, which is kind of...
Well, nature with a capital N.
That's right, exactly the case. Okay, cool. What in you guys' view is the most compelling scientific evidence for the Bible's creation account being true?
For me personally, I guess coming from a electrical engineering, computer networking background, I'd have to say it's the information system in every single one of our cells, the DNA. It's astonishing. I was just listening to John Sanford with Genetic Entropy, and he was telling us, normally we think of DNA as just kind of like a tape, with all of these letters A, C, T, G, and repeated, various, and then you just run along this tape and you read it off. You read off, John Ashton like a linear story, if I could put it that way. But the amazing thing is this, is that DNA and that our genetic system as an information system is absolutely astonishing. And what it is that you can take a piece of DNA code, this length here, and what you'll find is there's not only the code that you can read this way, you can also read a different, there's code you can read backwards as well, and there's overlapping codes. You can read codes within codes.
Yeah.
And then not only that, you can take your tape of DNA the molecule, and you can wrap it round and you can read different things. And this is, this is part of epigenetics and it's like a hyperdimensional piece of code. Which is absolutely astonishing.
Yeah.
For an electrical engineer and a computer networking person to actually make a code like that is profound.
Mm-hmm.
And to say that evolved,
Arose by chance.
arose by chance, by natural mutations, when you don't actually have a self-replicating mechanism with the DNA and with the living cell, for me is just is mind-boggling, but it's also getting to the point of, if I could put it this way, ridiculous. And I say that not in a demeaning kind of way.
Yeah.
I think this is an important point, and some people will say, okay, that you've got your scientists and then you've got your engineers, and engineering is applied science. But one of the things with engineering is you're actually making things. It's actually a creative process.
It's got to work.
It's not just an analytical process. It's a synthetic process, making it. And I think this is really important. And this is why I just recommend listen to some of the engineers like Mark Harwood, who created the satellite system for Optus and things like that. Because the engineers in this multidisciplinary approach to creation, you can get some amazing insights. That this type of code, to believe this evolved, is just beyond the pales of true possibility, plausibility, and logic.
Yeah.
But also the code has to represent the organism that it's within.
Correct.
So you've got a huge probability. Not only has the code got to arise by chance, but the code, for example, in the first cell, has to represent this random array of molecules that has all come together that somehow works. Right? So, that correspondence, it's just impossible. But even the code by itself is useless without a code reader.
Correct. And error-checking mechanisms as well.
Yeah. So, so the reader that reads the code is the ribosome, which is a really complex molecule made up of over 300,000 atoms that they've only, in the last 10 years discovered its structure, right? And they still don't know how it works exactly. And this enables it to read the code, but you've got to have a code reader that can able to read the code. But the fascinating thing is that within DNA is the instructions to make the code reader, but it's useless unless there is a code reader already in existence to read the code to make the code reader.
Wow.
So this, again, logically presents that it's absolutely impossible. But I think the other thing with the biblical account is this, that it says that a non-material God created the material universe. And when you think the origin of the universe has to be outside the universe.
Of space and time.
Yeah, outside universe, matter, space and time, because, thermodynamically the universe is running down, so we have to have a beginning. Otherwise we throw out all the known laws of physics, and where do we stand then, And the interesting thing is that the known laws of physics can't explain the origin of the universe, they can't explain the structure of the universe. As we, discover now these huge structures within, astronomy sort of thing, but there's not enough time, the universe. And sometimes Christians get worried about, well, hang on, how can we see the light from distant stars and all this sort of thing? Well, scientists have this major problem.
The horizon problem.
The horizon problem.
Exactly.
The universe is 45 billion light years in diameter, but only 13.8 billion years.
93 in diameter.
45 in radius. 93 in diameter. So there's not enough time, even travelling at the speed of light,
for the Big Bang.
to get
get out. Yeah.
So you have the same problem in the Big Bang theory.
Yeah.
So you don't escape the problem by accepting evolution.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
You just
you don't.
transition it into a different form.
It's exactly the same problem.
Yeah,
And
wow.
there's lots of things that are just so exciting when we look at Maxwell's equations and energy fields and all these sort of things, and our concept of gravity and time and the Reichenbach sort of simultaneity equation problem of, that looks at, people don't realise that we can't actually measure the speed of light one way. We can only measure the average speed of light. the two-way speed of light. All sorts of things like this that point to an amazing creator. But the Bible talks of this creator, not like the other, tribes at the time was the sun or some particular physical form. The creator was a non-material being, a non-material mind, which is a really advanced concept, but it explains things. And the other thing that I, really feel strongly about is that our mind, our thoughts are non-material as well.
Right.
We can't weigh our thoughts. We can't, put our thoughts on a balance, put them in a measuring cylinder, this sort of thing. Our thoughts, but yet our thoughts, I can move my hand here, I'm talking to you. My non-material thoughts are affecting this material body. Surely a non-material God can affect the material world and create it. And it fits it, to me, it makes so much sense. And then when we see the accounts of the answers to prayer, I've experienced answers to prayer myself, the reality, God is so real to me. That's why I'm so passionate about it. And I think we know that we can trust the Bible as God's word. And so as a scientist then, my view is that we look at the world through the lens of the Bible. And when we think about the foundation of the Royal Society, this elite structure in England was based, Francis Bacon idea, where he said, well, Adam, there was the fall. Before the fall, Adam had superior intelligence. After the fall, us humans now don't have as much intelligence. We need to work together to understand God's nature, and hence the idea that scientists would make observations, true observations, be honest, and put these together. It underpins all modern science.
Yep. And I just really want to add to that as well. I think our minds are incredible evidence for creation. Albert Einstein said that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. And the fact that we have the cognitive faculties to actually understand the universe, to understand biology and genetics, this is really, really profound. And if our minds do not lead us to true beliefs, if we cannot, connect with God, if we cannot understand God himself, then what it means is that our foundations for thinking itself are absolutely gutted, absolutely shot, if I could put it that way. So this is the amazing thing. Our confidence in science itself is based on the fact that we are created by God. And our minds are one of the most powerful reasons to believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. In what you were saying at first, to answer the question, Sven, I was thinking of what John Lennox in God's Undertaker says when he gives the argument of the search for
Extraterrestrial life.
Search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
SETI. Yes.
SETI project in the United States of America, where they put these great giant, what do they call those things? My mind is drawing a blank.
Radio telescopes or satellites.
Big telescopes into the sky, and they're listening, basically big giant ears in the desert, and they're listening for anything that comes from outer space that could be from an intelligent being or species. And he says that if we found, coming from outer space, language similar to that which we find in the DNA strands that we've now explored, he said there would not be one scientist on the planet that didn't accept that someone was speaking to us from outer space, which I think that's a pretty powerful argument.
Yeah.
You're basically, he's saying, look, if I can read this DNA and decode it, and I can say that the best approximation I can make to what this is language. Okay, that's the best way we could explain what we're seeing is this is language, this is communication, this is information.
Yes.
And it's coming to us in code, which is language. And if any scientist on the planet heard this coming from outer space, like in audible tones, what we're seeing visually, not one of them would deny that this is the source of this is intelligence. But when it comes to, the DNA strand, they explain it away, right?
Well, it's really interesting. Richard Dawkins, the challenge of explaining where DNA and the living cell, the information system in our genetics actually came from is such a challenging, it's such a hard nut to crack that even Richard Dawkins, they will kick the can further out into the cosmos and they'll say that, well, aliens seeded our planet with life and DNA. And for me, I'm going, well, that's intelligent design. You know, that's appealing to what we've always appealed
He's
to.
basically conceded creationists are right.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't stand to say it, so I'm just going to bring aliens into the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and you're saying too, John, in regards to, okay, if the universe has a beginning, it has to have a cause, because things don't cause them. Things can,
argument.
yeah, it's a philosophical argument, and I guess it's what is it? Callum's cosmological argument. It's based on the idea that nothing, like no effect can be its own cause, right? Like unless there hasn't been an original. Anyways, I'm going to get lost here, and I'm thinking, how do I distill this down in its simplest form for our audience? But it's like this. So if the universe has a beginning, it has to have a cause. Something that brought it into existence, because it couldn't have brought itself into existence. Now, the thing which brought it into existence could not be a part of it, right? It just follows logically. And so therefore, you have to have a spiritual mind, a transcendent being that was the cause of the universe.
That's correct.
The universe actually had a beginning, and all the scientific evidence we have available to us shows us that the universe had a beginning. But I think that's a very compelling, I think that argument is compelling, and I've never heard anyone answer to it in a serious way that has convinced me that it's not a good argument.
Yeah, and the thing is though, let's just be clear here. The scientific evidence for a beginning of the universe, one of the major things is the Big Bang Theory. Yeah. But you don't need to hold to the Big Bang Theory to recognize the beginning of the universe. And I just want to make that really clear. You've got the second law of thermodynamics. You've got other reasons. You've got philosophical reasons as well for this. So we're not locked in to the Big Bang Theory.
So the Big Bang Theory could be replaced with another theory. And
For sure.
Creation.
Yeah, exactly. God can create a universe.
Yeah,
I mean, he's all powerful. He can do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I think too is often missed, that we don't hear a real lot about James Clerk Maxwell. And to me, he was probably the greatest scientist ever, greater than Newton, greater than Einstein, because Einstein really just applied gravity to his field equations that Maxwell developed. So he was the guy that recognised that light was a combination of electric and magnetic fields. But he made contributions to kinetic theory, to so many areas of science. He was an absolutely brilliant physicist. And he was such a strong Bible-believing creationist, and he argued against, evolution, Darwinian evolution. But we don't hear much about that. And one of his things was, well, how did atoms evolve? Because another thing we look at is this whole concept of particle physics too. This is a whole other area that can be explained with God creating this amazing systems of force fields.
In my personal reading, because I, like you gentlemen, although not a scientist, have been interested in this subject because I'm a Bible-believing Christian, and I am someone who likes to know why I believe what I believe, and I like to think, I like to study. It's a part of my Christian experience. But in the reading that I've done, I have not found this, I have not found this field of people who all agree. I've just not seen that. Like, if I study a particular field, like if I say, okay, I'm just going to study physics for a while, like on a layman's level, I'm just going to study what people in the field of physics think about origins or evolution and these kinds of things. On a lot of the evidences that people bring forward as evidences for evolution from the study of physics, there'll be a lot of disagreement on those evidences or those supposed evidences. And then it's the same in all scientific fields. So when you go into each field, it seems like there's a lot of disagreement on what is and what isn't evidence for evolution. And so you don't see this unanimous voice of, yes, evolution is true, except for when you go to a university classroom. Then all of a sudden, everyone agrees, there's unanimity and whatever. The only unanimity I find personally in my lay adventure in studying the sciences is that we all agree that evolution happened. But when it comes to building the case for evolution, all of the evidences to build a case for evolution are all contended within the fields that they come from. Have you guys noticed the same thing?
Well, that's because there is no known mechanism for evolution that actually scientifically works.
That's right. That's what David Berlinski argues. Is he says there's no canonical example in say geology to show evolution. Like there's no like this proves it, like as there is in other sciences and fields of study. So
it's the same with radiometric dating. The methods have never actually been validated. We don't have calibrated rocks of different ages that can verify the method, and the same with carbon-14.
Oh, that's crazy. And I admittedly, when I say what I'm saying here, I know I'm not a learned scientist, and I'm just coming at it from a lay perspective, picking up a book and reading. But I've, in everything I've read, seen a lot of contention within fields over certain, what like Jonathan Wells would call icons of evolution. So where there's these certain widely accepted evidences for evolution, but then when you go into the respective fields, there's a ton of contention in that field over whether or not that's an actual evidence.
Well, Alvin Plantinga put it this way. He said, when you're committed to naturalism, I mean, evolution is the only game in town. So you've got to push that barrow.
That's right.
You have to drive that car all the way to the end.
Yep.
Whereas for us as Christians, the thing is that we believe that God does intervene. He can step in. He can, he can create dolphins de novo. He can create human beings, not using natural processes. And this is the key. There's such a need, as Richard Lewontin said, to keep God out of the picture, that you're committed to evolution.
Well, gentlemen, I'd love to continue to talk, but we've got to end for the sake of time. I think we should consider the possibility of ongoing discussions about evolution. This is specifically recorded for Creation Sabbath, but man, I think there's 50 things I wanted to bring up with you guys that we didn't get a chance to bring up. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts and your understandings with our larger church family in North New South Wales. God willing, this can be the beginning of a larger conversation that continues to happen here about creation versus evolution. I really believe with all of my heart that the devil has the goal of undermining faith through the proliferation in our church of Darwinianism. And I think it's really, really important that we as ministers of the gospel, as scientists who are believers in the biblical account of creation, we come forward with the best possible arguments for creationism that we possibly can, not because we want to argue or be argumentative, not because we think that information saves people in and of itself, but because we know what's happening to generations of our young people because of their exposure to these assertions, these unproven assertions that are in evolutionary theory. And God willing, we'll do this again. If, when I say this, do this again, I hope we can do this again at some point and get into all the things that I would love to get into with you guys. But thanks so much for joining us, everyone. God bless you as you enjoy Creation Sabbath, and we look forward to continuing as your conference leadership to provide as many possible resources as we can in this subject. God bless you guys, and take care.